Hi, welcome to Books to Boardrooms with Dr. Kiran. Today I have the privilege of having Mr. Shenin. Mr. Shenin is somebody who has spent close to 20 years in the education industry. And let us hear from him his background and his expertise in this area. So Shenin, thanks a lot for coming. It's a pleasure to have you in my show. So can you just give a little background about yourself and your relationship with the education as an industry?
Thank you so much, Dr. Kiran, for inviting me, and thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure as well from my side. Well, when it comes to education industry, as you said, it's more than 20 years. It's 22 years to be precise. I started by contributing to vocational educational institutes here, or what we call training centers. Then with higher education institutions, universities, colleges. And then currently I work with the Ministry of Education in the compliance inspection sector. It's quite a long period working with and learning from different providers at different levels, institute, colleges, universities, university colleges, as we have different categories. I have also contributed to qualification development for the national qualification. It was National Qualification Authority in the beginning, now it's National Qualification Center. And I have also worked closely with higher education institutions, contributing to part-time teaching, training. And also I have been working with project management consultancies, because project management is another domain of mine. So in a nutshell, that's me. Thank you.
Thanks. I think it's a wider area. I'm pretty new to academics. It's been 6 years in academics. Before that, I was in the industry. But being in that space, I mean, any country you take, the universities, higher education, or education as such is the responsibility of the government, and there's a lot of regulations and compliance. And that's very important to ensure that people who spend money for studying or the education system runs smoothly. So I'm sure you have experience in the compliance side in terms of, as I told you, this is applicable for every education institution across the world. So how important is compliance, and what exactly why is it necessary?
See, compliance is necessary to ensure whether any educational institution is adhering to government rules, regulations, federal decrees, and whether they are adhering to existing best practices in the world. So majority of other kinds of audits, supervisions and inspections, they are more orientated towards the academic side of an institution, looking at the didactics, observing and evaluating classrooms. And the focus is more within the classroom. Whereas compliance inspection is looking at the ecosystem, a conducive learning environment, of course, would deliver provisions for effective learning practices. So that's the whole essence of having a compliance inspection, to ensure this institution has necessary infrastructure in place. Do they have the right set of resources? Do they follow legal, statutory regulations, etc.? So these are support mechanisms for an institution to function. So compliance inspection looks into those aspects, making sure that there is a readiness in place. And this is the first of its kind in the world for UAE to have a compliance inspection sector.
So when you say a compliance inspection sector, and you're going to check regularly, I mean, the institutions need to make sure that they are following the requirements. So do you have guidelines and standards which you communicate with the respective institutions, so that they know exactly what is the authorities' expectations, and and where they stand? So do you have guidelines, and how you communicate these guidelines?
Compliance inspections are purely based on the compliance inspection framework for higher education institutions. And this framework consists of a number of standards that the institution needs to follow. And when it comes to communication, these standards are published on ministry's website. Institutions are notified, informed about the publication of this framework. Initially, this communication is sent out to all institutions via email. And at the time of inspection, prior to the inspection, 3 weeks prior to the inspection, institutions are notified that there is an inspection in place, and the inspection follows the compliance inspection framework, and we attach the framework with that email notification, so they get to know, in addition to the initial communication, they get to know that there is a framework in place and this is what we need to follow. There are a set of requirements actually for the institutions to adhere to.
So when you do this type of complaint in general for any country, do you do a lot of benchmarking, international benchmarking or local benchmarking to understand that a specific country's education system is exceptionally well, and they are not outdated and stuff like that? So is that part of the complaints responsibility?
Well, the compliance inspection framework itself is built on a premise of an eclectic model where best practices from various countries, higher education best practices, from a list of carefully selected countries is reviewed, looked upon, and how we could contextualize this to the UAE setting. And the articulation of the framework is in line with that. Not only that, we have also regional best practices. We have UAE-based licensing and accreditation guidelines published by the Commission of Academic Accreditation, that's the CAA. So we draw from and we learn and adapt from all these best practices and what we call regulations, and the compilation of the framework is built on top of that. So when we do an inspection, the inspection gives the institution a feel not only of the regional regulations and best practices, they also have to adhere to international best practices indirectly. So that would really prepare them or equip them not only to meet the regional regulations, but also international regulators and international accreditations as well.
So if you look back from a university or an educational institution's point of view, when you have done an international benchmarking and then you say, so these are the things we are going to inspect, that means you need to have that. So in other way, it actually helped these institutions to say that what an ideal educational institution, if you need to be in international competing or standards need to be, so they don't need to do an initial bench, but they can get these compliance guidelines, and if they follow that, you mean to say that, okay, they will be, they can deliver an excellent facilities or infrastructure for the student community?
Certainly yes. Certainly yes, because if you really look at the framework itself, the framework consists of 14 standards ranging from policy, procedures at a governance level, strategic leadership, continuous quality enhancement, so on and so forth, covering every aspect of what an institution should look like to meet the needs of the society, their students, their faculty, their infrastructure, etc. Now, as you said, an inspection is basically communicating to the institution, look here, this is an opportunity for you to get ready. This is the preparedness guideline. If you make yourself ready using these guidelines and requirements, we are kind of giving you a consultancy service, by the way, by having this inspection. Even though we call it a compliance inspection, it's a collaborative effort from the side of the Ministry of Education to grow together. We understand that we have institutions who are matured enough to meet the needs of the industry. At the same time, we have emerging institutions. So we kind of equip them to grow up, grow together, and collaborate with the ministry so that in a way you can be prepared.
I think that's fantastic, because before I speak to you, I have gone through these MOEs, the complaints manual, as told of the 14 different standards, and it is so clearly outlined. Even when it comes to policies, it's clearly outlined what are the different types of policies a higher education or education institution must have or should have. So it's very easy to come back at any point of time to see, compare where you stand, what is missing, because you have a guideline in place. That's so right. I think it's actually helping the institution as before the checking that what are the things that we need, follow that. This is clearly mentioned there, and even inside what the policy should mention also is actually detailed description is given within that.
Yeah.
So this even looking at one of the document, like for example, a comprehensive program specification document, for example. Now, when you hear what does it show? What is the difference between that with a brochure? But if you go inside, that is clearly mentioned. What are the subheadings which is supposed to be inside that?
Exactly.
I think that's something which is great in terms of, so universities or educational institutions to know, which will help them to know that.
Yeah.
So now having the guideline, okay, it's one. So during the complaints inspectors like you, when you go for that, is it to analyze the risk? Is that something which you give more importance to, or you give more importance to the violations, or what is the impact? It's more about improvements. So what will be the mindset of having these regulations in place from a university point of view, or from when you go in that point of view?
See, it's the whole compliance inspection framework is, and the implementation or the enactment of an inspection is risk-based approach. Because institutions, when they prepare for an inspection, it's not just actually they should be preparing themselves for an inspection. This is actually what an institution is expected to have. Now, we are going there to make sure that, do you have these things which you should normally have them? And a policy and procedures guideline is not something that should be prepared just for the sake of an inspection. A student manual need not to be updated just because you have an inspection. It's basically a risk-based approach needs to be adopted by an institution. Be proactive to ensure that there are certain uncertainties that's faced by the institution, and those uncertainties could be covered when we go for an inspection. It's basically what we do is, when we go for an inspection, there's a pre-inspection phase. So during the pre-inspection phase, we tell the institutions that we are coming. This is the plan for the inspection. This is a 4 to 5 days of inspection. These are the number of inspectors, and these are the standards that we will be looking at. Now, when it comes to readiness, it's again helping the institution to make sure that they have the right mitigation strategies to meet the risk. Now, from our side, we do the inspection, and the inspection would result in an outcome that internally we have a mechanism to articulate, to gauge the risk rating of an institution. So if the institution, for example, is a low risk institution, that means it's more or less fully compliant with the ministry's framework. Now, particularly within the standard, we have domains relating to the risk management requirement for an institution to have. Do they have a risk management mechanism in place in terms of a strategy? Do they have a continuous and dynamic risk register they record? Not only just to have them on paper, to make sure that their risk mitigation plans are continuous, dynamic, and they keep on updating that. And there is a specific element within the framework that requires the institution to have an assigned, dedicated resource, a personnel, to manage risk management within the institution. And this is not just at an institutional level. We look at it from various aspects. For example, there is another element within the framework that looks at financial risk, by the way. We look at institutions to have a self-evaluation, which really, if you look at self-evaluation from a quality assurance perspective, it's a risk-based approach. I'm trying to foresee the uncertainties. And then the ministry asks them, do you have a self-evaluation report and an improvement action plan? If you really look at from a risk management perspective, it's actually asking for the risk mitigation strategies. We don't expect institutions to be foolproof, perfect institutions, and that's again a case of investigation. Now, we look at an institution, these are the things that we have. And how do you know that? We do self-evaluate. We ensure that we talk to our own stakeholders. We ask our students, are we good enough? And the students, we listen to students, we take their opinion. And then, whatever the student says, the faculty member says, those who interface with your systems, let them talk about it. And then you do evaluate yourself. Ministry is not prescribing any mechanism. You do that internally. Then based on that, how are you going to deal with that? What's your plan for that? Now, indirectly, we haven't used the word explicitly risk management in those areas, but self-evaluation and an improvement action plan is gearing up an institution to really be risk what you can say, it should be a pro-risk institution, where risk management practices are adopted, followed and implemented.